Welcome on into Forward Progress presented by the Hammer Betting Network. I'm your host, Eric Pauly of the Gold Sheet, joined by professional sports bettor Suma and Eric Eager of Sumer Sports. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things going from recent changes in the NFL rules, a couple of recent moves across the NFL, as well as some mock draft talk. But before we get started, first things first, like and subscribe and share the content with your peers. And all comments will be read in real time. So if you want to comment, subscribe to the channel, write your comments, and we will get to them during the show. But again, before we get started, I want to remind everybody that Pinnacle Sportsbook is the world's sharpest sportsbook, offering competitive odds for 25 years. Hammer is all about line shopping, and with everyday competitive odds, Pinnacle should certainly be one of your available outs. If you want to support the show, use code HAMMER when signing up to Pinnacle, your trusted sportsbook for 25 years. Bet smart. Bet Pinnacle, must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly, and it is not available in the U.S. But gentlemen, before we get into, or let's start, I should say, with a recent move. So now the Kansas City Chiefs franchise tag with Jerry Sneed, and the Tennessee Titans swooped in, made a trade for Sneed for a 2025 third, as well as signed to an extension. Suma or Eric, who wants to start talking about the thoughts on the Titans picking up with Jerry Sneed?
Yeah, it was. I thought it was a move that Kansas City sort of played their hand. Sneed was a fourth-round pick out of La Tech in 2020. He had been a pretty good corner, I would say, for 3 years. And I think most of the time when the Chiefs do this kind of thing, they generally speaking let that player walk in free agency. You don't see very many big extensions except for like the very key players, the Chris Joneses, the Travis Kelce's, the Patrick Mahomeses, and then every other guy they choose to extend is generally speaking more of a minimum contract or kind of an exemption player. So going into last year, for one, Sneed had a knee injury the whole training camp that I think prevented them from signing him to an extension before he had a great season. And then last year, he was one of the best corners in all of football. Then, you get there and they obviously, I don't think, wanted the optics of letting him walk and getting a comp pick in 2025, assuming they, didn't max out the formula there. So they franchise tag him, they hold up $20 million, and ultimately what they got was a third round pick when they would have gotten a comp pick that was about 20 picks earlier than the best comp pick they ever would have gotten. And then they get the 20 million off their books. So I don't think Kansas City did all that well here, but I think that they did better than what they would have gotten had Sneed left. I think for Tennessee, it's just another player that they added to the stable who's pretty good. All of the warts that Sneed has notwithstanding, now you add, Calvin Ridley, Sneed, Kenneth Murray, who I know our friend Jeff Feinberg will tell us is not a very good player. But they've added, Tony Pollard as well. Will Levis on a rookie contract. I do think that Tennessee is at least trying in an AFC South, which a year ago was so bad that Jacksonville was minus 160 to win that division as kind of a very flawed football team. Now you have Houston, who's probably going to be pretty good. You have Jacksonville, I think, will rebound at least a little bit. And Indianapolis, who was right on the doorstep of the playoffs last year. Tennessee realizes they have to compete, and they bring Sneed in to do just that.
Yes, certainly. Sue, any thoughts on the Sneed trade as well as just the Titans' outlook in general, considering all those moves that Eric mentioned as they're trying to be competitive in this rookie contract window for Will Levis?
Yes, I absolutely like what the Titans are doing. We have no clue whether Will Levis will make a significant step forward, but the Titans at least are doing everything they can to make this window as efficient as possible. And I also want to talk about, there were a lot of people who said that the Chiefs got fleeced in the trade or whatever. I mean, in hindsight, I personally thought the Chiefs would net a second round pick, but the more I think about it, like the knee injury that Eric has mentioned, and it just seems like there wasn't a big trade market for him. Cornerbacks are not big into the contract game right now, especially this offseason. And like everyone knew that the Chiefs don't want to pay him long term. And in hindsight, it was probably the best that the Chiefs could get. So I just thought that the talk about them getting fleeced was overblown. Also, even if they would have gotten a third round comp pick in 2025, they are now getting a better third round pick. So I think all in all, probably the best that the Chiefs could get, and a very good trade for the Titans, in my opinion.
Yeah, Titans certainly need talent on both sides of the ball. They get that with Snead, and the Chiefs, like Eric mentioned, not the kind of team to be paying out this kind of money to some players like Snead, and do what they have to do in order to recoup some compensation for his services. But overall, pretty slow week in the NFL. We do have two very notable rule changes that came up at the owners' meeting. First one we're going to talk about is the hip drop tackle, a very dangerous play that was brought really to light when Mark Andrews went down with a hip drop tackle toward the end of the regular season last year. Now the rule is if there is a hip drop tackle, it is a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Now, again, whichever one you want to speak on this first, I know this is said to prioritize player safety, but at this point, are we just adding another layer of possible things the defense can do to now just get you a 15-yard penalty, a la a weak roughing the passer call or a weak pass interference call? Or is this something generally that's going to be good for the safety of players moving forward?
I'm personally, let's say, afraid that it's going to be a mess in terms of how the refs are going to call and review it next season. The video that the NFL presented at the coaches meeting, like there was the tackle on Tony Pollard, where I personally thought, okay, if you ban such a tackle, how's the defense supposed to tackle in general? Then listening to more people with more knowledge on that, it appears that it's only like one call per game for 15 yards. If it stays in that range, okay, it's just another penalty layer in favor of the offense. But I'm just curious to see how refs are going to define such a tackle on the fly next season.
Yeah, I think the one interesting thing, and I don't know, I'd have to see how this is applied, but there was a small change that said that the officials can review things like roughing the passer, Eric, right? So we've seen that in the UFL the USFL, and it's done a pretty good job. I mean, there have been times when there's been ticky-tack penalties on interceptions and everything where they've literally gone in and said, well, this isn't roughing the passer. I wonder if that's going to be applied to the hip drop tackle where, they can go in and say, guys, like, I know we called the penalty here, but I'm not really sure we should have called this. If that's the case, I'm all for this. Like, look, anybody who's against this rule should have had to watch Tony Pollard's carries last year, all of them, because that was one of the worst comebacks from an injury that was, and Kenyon Drake even said it on Instagram too, is like, these tackles like ruin the careers of offensive players. And if you look at 2020, the pandemic year, 48.6 points a game, I believe. Last year, it was a little under 44 points a game. Not to say that we want all this scoring. I kind of like, I kind of like football where the defenses at least have a shot. But at the same time, I think we want the best offensive players playing, I think aesthetically speaking. So I'm for it, especially if the new reviews also apply to the hip drop tackle, because then we can go in and actually, keep some of these players more healthy. The one thing I do worry about, and this doesn't have anything to do with gambling, but I do worry about the owners having another way of finding players. A lot of these players don't make all that much money. You're talking about like $500,000-$600,000. If you find a player like $50,000 after taxes or something for a hip drop tackle, like that's a significant cut of what they're making, and I don't like the optics of that. So I just hope that the league is responsible here. But we know that the NFL, they win every single game, but they don't cover hardly any spreads. So they'll probably still do we'll probably still all be there and watch. But they'll probably mess this up at least a little bit. But I like them trying to keep players healthier. That's going to be good for the game, of course.
So in a league where there are penalties, like you mentioned, pass interference, roughing the passer, obviously on the hip drop tackle, if they can be reviewed now, it's awesome for the league, because there are so many times where all of us gambling on the games, we're seeing instances where penalties are called or not called when they clearly should be. But the essence of this change also has to do with player safety. Now, this isn't fully gambling related, but just a quick question for either one of you. When is Goodell going to come down and say, okay, if we're going to changed the rules in terms of a hip drop tackle, a dangerous play now being a penalty. Where are they going to take it to the full extent for the player safety and finally make everybody use grass fields and get rid of the MetLife turf and some other things that are clearly horrible for player safety?
Well, the NFL has done these studies, right? And I think that the really hard part is, and it's funny, at sumersports.com, one of the last articles I wrote was whether or not you should sit a rookie quarterback. And while it doesn't seem all that related, it is, because in the NFL, there's so many confounders, right? There's so many, the teams that have the grass fields may have terrible staffs as far as strength and conditioning and things like that. So the NFL so far in all of their analyses have not found statistically significant differences in injury rates with grass and turf. And so the NFL, as I just said, is just going to do the bare minimum here. And so, like, I don't actually think that they're going to do anything with grass and turf because, to your point, Eric, like, it is better. Grass, everybody who's played on grass and turf knows that it's obviously softer. But so far, the NFL, because of all the confounders, has not been able to actually discern has not been able to prove a discernible difference. And so I just don't think for the MetLife stadiums and the US Bank stadiums and the all of the indoor ones, for example, where it's actually quite expensive to get, to wheel turf from, Colorado to Las Vegas for that indoor stadium. I just think that the NFL is going to drag their feet on that as well. But and we already saw they're going to play 2 games on Christmas following games on Saturday. And so you're already going to make those 2 teams play 2 games on short rest. Like, they're not all that serious about player safety. They're just trying to, like, it's an optics play in this particular case.
No, that totally checks out. So any thoughts for the next topic?
No, we can go.
All right, let's keep on moving to the next big rule change. Kickoffs have been changed in the NFL. Now, Eric, I think you have some more thoughts on this as well. Just give me a little breakdown of, for starters, how it will change, if anything at all. 2, the thoughts on touchbacks, if they become one of the biggest things to do on kickoffs. Is that still the case? And is this going to lead to more scoring? I know we saw, of course, that through the other leagues that were using this rule, that there was an increased rate of returns, there was less injuries, and there was more impact on the game and more excitement for the fan perspective. So, Eric, talk to me a little bit more about the optics of the fact of the kickoff rule change, what changes to expect, and what some strategies you expect smarter teams probably to deploy probably from the get-go.
Yeah, well, in the XFL in 2020, which was when they started that kickoff rule, prior to the pandemic, there were 5 weeks. This is the data that I haven't actually looked at the 2023 data on this, but in 2022, they had 0 injuries on the kickoff. So that obviously is what you want. And the real injuries that come from the kickoff are the collisions between the blockers and the guys that are running down the field. And so, as you can see in the video here, those collisions are not as high speed, and so you are going to get fewer concussions. You are going to get fewer of those concussive, kind of collisions there. So that should be good. I think the touchback going out to the 30 and then the short kicks having to be returned. So there's no fair catch. We only got the 1 year where a team could fair catch a short kickoff like college football. I think you're going to see a ton of returns early on. These special teams coaches, even last year, we only saw fair catches on a very small fraction of kickoff returns, despite the fact that it gave you a free route to the 25-yard line, which was plus EV relative to where actual returns go. These special teams coaches are going to opt into this. I think the smart teams are going to look at it and still say, from a practice standpoint and from an injury standpoint, it's still not plus EV to opt into special teams as much as before. So I do think that there may be a team or two that just decides that playing defense from the 30-yard line is smart, because in the NFL nowadays, it's not a 3-and-out league. It is a high drive success, low touchdown success league. And so whether or not you start at the 30 or whether or not you start at the 22 is really it's a lot of those drives end in 3 points anyway. And so teams are just going to opt into the drive starting at the 30 and save, practice time and save, injuries on their players. But the sticky part there is teams like Kansas City, who are playing in January all the time outside in the cold, you can't necessarily kick touchbacks in January with that weather. So every team is going to have to practice this, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what the strategies are. I would assume that most of the kickoff returners are going to be more like punt returners now than they would be actual like historically kick returners have been more the speedier guys and punt returners have been more the shiftier guys. I think you're going to see more punt returners because it is more like a punt. When you're catching the ball and players are closer to you, you have to be more elusive than you have to be fast.
Very true. Suma, any thoughts?
Yeah, I will also be. It will be interesting to see whether teams maybe put a little bit more emphasis and capacity on punt returners, maybe in the draft. Maybe some wide receivers, running backs who are also capable of returning punts might go a little bit higher. Maybe we might see more of a one on undrafted free agents who have these qualities. That will be interesting to see. And I mean, for the excitement of the game, like, that's going to be nuts. When you consider that in the Super Bowl we had, I think 12 of 13 kickoffs went like right through the end zone. So, I mean, it's going to be more exciting. I can't wait to see more punt returns, and I also think that we might see some more resources spent on punt returners / kick returners.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers went ahead and signed Cordell Patterson basically immediately after this news, reuniting with Arthur Smith now in Pittsburgh. Maybe a little bit of a sign of a shift there, also the familiarity right there. But it's going to be interesting because if we're seeing a lot more returns and a lot more dynamic plays out of there, I'm sure we'll see an impact in totals as well. So something to definitely keep in mind as we move forward through this NFL season. A lot more to learn. But before we go to our final topic, I want to remind everybody that On the Clock is a show with Rob Pizzola on the Hammer Betting Network, where we run through all 32 NFL teams and do a mock draft of the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Rob did his first one on Monday with his beloved Dallas Cowboys, made some crazy trades in that draft as well, so make sure to subscribe to not miss that series. I did one with him with the Commanders last year. She'll be doing it again this year. Great show, great fun. On the Clock. Make sure to subscribe to not miss out. And gentlemen, let's finish off with some draft talk. Right now, as we speak, Malik Nabers is going through his pro day. He already posted a 42-inch vertical jump. And right now, there's a little bit of a question. So looking at the betting markets, it's still Marvin Harrison's is the pick to go first in terms of receivers. He's minus 700 to a Nabers 4-1. But do we think we're going to start seeing some steam for Nabers after a pro day, which we'll assume will have some crazy numbers? Marvin Harrison electing not to combine, not to have his pro day. Or is this just a sign of just some some prospect fatigue? Because Marvin Harrison Jr. at this point has been, lauded for 2+ years at this point. And then, so that's the first question. And the second question, regardless of whether or not who goes first or second, who do you perceive to be the better wide receiver in the National Football League, Marvin Harrison or Malik Nabers? Sumer, Eric, whoever has thoughts, hop in first.
First question for me, yes, if he has a great pro day, if he gets a little bit more hype in the media by guys like, I don't know, DJ or whatever, I can see a little bit more Nabers money. But overall, I think that draft media has been overthinking this in recent weeks. There are some folks who are saying, oh, maybe Nabers is wide receiver 1. It's pretty close. Marvin Harrison is minus 800 in the range right now. I mean, let's not overthink this. He is the number 1 wide receiver, and I think there has to happen a lot for Nabers to really chase him in the betting markets. I just don't see him. I think that everyone who says it's close, Nabers might actually be wide receiver 1. It's just for clicks at this point.
Yeah, so every single look I've had at some basically internal scouting has them basically the same. And so that is, that's food for thought. I think the one thing that's different between the two is Marvin Harrison is obviously a little taller. The majority of his stuff at the college level has been on the outside when you look at his routes and where he's won and things like that, whereas Nabers has been kind of a little bit more diverse, which I think NFL teams, they do really ask the question, can a guy line up at X receiver on the line of scrimmage without any motion and get open and be that player? I think that's like the only thing that Marvin Harrison Jr. has ahead of Nabers, which matters to NFL teams. Now, we have seen in the past, we have seen, for example, Henry Ruggs go in front of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. We've seen teams now there were probably a third of the league had Jalen Waddle ahead of Jamar Chase in the 2021 draft. There are differences of opinion here. It just has to be basically it just has to be the right team. And I think from everything we've heard, there's really no reason to believe that the teams at the top of the draft, the Chargers, the Cardinals, even the Giants, those teams like Marvin Harrison less than they like Malik Nabers. So I agree with Suma. I think, until you actually see some steam, it really is just us kind of guessing here. And Harrison does have a few of the fundamentals that you would like over Nabers, as good as he is, which is quite good.
Yeah, we have about a month until the draft, and like we mentioned, the Nabers Pro Day is happening as we speak. So obviously, GMs that are there and watching are still formulating their own opinions. So, like you just mentioned, Eric, once you actually start seeing some legitimate steam in this market closer to draft day, is probably going to be more of an indication of what's going on. Right now, about a month out, not sure we're getting anything really locked and loaded. And that's a pretty good segue into the next question, talking about quarterbacks. J.J. McCarthy getting some serious beam to go number 2. Current odds, we're looking at Jaden Daniels minus 120, Drake May plus 200, and then McCarthy now at plus 300 to go number 2 to the Washington Commanders. Again, are we talking just some steam here, or is there some serious rumblings that J.J. McCarthy is a top 2 pick in this year's draft?
I don't know, guys. I mean, you guys remember when John Lynch was hired by the 49ers, right? The John Lynch was hired out of nowhere, and one of the reasons he wanted to be a 49er was because they proved to him that they could hire him without leaking any of the information. Fast forward, we had no idea that we're going to trade the Trubisky pick and draft Solomon Thomas. I had, now he's retired, I can probably out him here. I had Peter King tell me the morning of the 2021 draft, they are taking Mac Jones. So so, you have Adam Peters come over from the Niners. Like, they are not leaking anything. Everything that we have heard from NFL Network, from all of our it is not well sourced. We are all guessing. These numbers are moving on air. We all know, we all respect the market, of course, but draft prop markets in March are as dull as any of the betting markets you're going to have. So the fact that, McCarthy has moved from 14-1 or whatever to, 5-2 or what to be, the second pick overall, to me, I don't necessarily think that is illustrative of what'll actually happen. Do I think it could happen? Yeah. But I don't necessarily think the move towards Jaden Daniels was meaningful. Everybody's talking about, Marcus Mariota being the backup there. For one, they tried to sign Sam Darnold to be the backup there. And two, just look at Indianapolis. Indianapolis signed Joe Flacco to be the backup to Anthony Richardson. There really isn't a correlation oftentimes between the kind of player the backup quarterback is and the kind of player the starter is. So I think all three guys, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and J.J. McCarthy, and in my opinion, in that order, are in play at number 2. And if you look at sort of the history of draft media and things like that, you oftentimes can kind of ignore some of the steam at this time of year. And so if you do that, Drake May was considered quarterback 2, a month and a half ago. And so I'm going to stick to that prior a little bit more than I'm going to kind of float towards the news. Now, when Zach Wilson was the number 2 pick for the Jets in 2021, you saw the market move significantly to him. That was because they leaked it. These things, everything is minus 150, minus 125, plus 250, all that stuff. That just means the market doesn't really know, and they're just trading off of air.
Yeah, that certainly checks out. Suma, thoughts on the number 2 overall pick? Do you have, your best guess, obviously, if you think they should take? And is McCarthy one of those guys that should be chosen before Daniels or May?
First of all, I completely agree with everything that Eric has said. To me, it baffles me a little bit more that Jaden Daniels is actually that far ahead of Drake May rather than J.J. McCarthy catching some steam in March. Because, this is selection bias, but the people I listen to or read about when it comes to quarterback analysis, they aren't always right, for sure, but I haven't seen anyone who was saying that Jaden Daniels is a better prospect than Drake May. Drake May has been, Caleb Williams and Drake May have been like the 1A, 1B going into the offseason. And then, okay, now all of a sudden it appears that Caleb Williams will go to the Bears at 1. But to me, it really comes out of nowhere that Jaden Daniels is so far ahead in all the mock drafts right now, ahead of Drake May, especially when you consider the playing style. Like, he reminds me a little bit of the Justin Fields discussions, like high pressure to sack rate, very athletic, but maybe limited as a passer. And we just saw this offseason that a guy like Justin Fields is trading for a 4th to a 6th rounder with such a profile. And I'm right now, I can be wrong, but right now I don't buy that NFL front offices who are going to pick in the top 3 will have a guy like Jaden Daniels ahead of Drake May. At this point, the Drake May price is starting to get very interesting.
No, you made some great points throughout that as well. It's just like, also Eric too, it's just at this point nobody knows. So why are you really going to be buying this team? Like Jaden Daniels, like you mentioned, obviously Heisman season average over 10 yards per play, but it shows some limitations. And the NFL just told us what they think about a player that's probably very similar to Jaden Daniels in Justin Fields, but they only think he's worth. Now, can Daniels be better? Absolutely, but like you said, May was coming into this offseason supposed to be the number 2 guy, so I'm not sure exactly what has changed so much there. That's actually all the topics we have discussed on the agenda to discuss today. I'd like to remind everybody, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the content so everybody can see. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. See you guys next time.